Have you ever wondered about the rich history of Fort Moultrie? Hi, I'm Allie, and we'll be talking about the history, design, and famous people here at Fort Moultrie. Without further ado, welcome to Fort Moultrie. So, why is Fort Moultrie here anyways?
Fort Moultrie was initially used for South Carolina as a ground used in defense against British attack. Well, why are they attacking, you might ask? It was used in 1776 for the Battle of Sullivan's Island. This was one of many wars patriots had with the British throughout the American Revolution, or the fight for independence. Now that you know why it was made,
So, what's the history of Fort Moultrie? The fort was, like I said, a defense ground from the British. They didn't have a name yet, but then they got his name, William Moultrie, from the fearless commander in 1776. Not a lot of people know this, but he is buried behind the Visitor Center in Fort Moultrie. What people less know is that only his hand is buried because when they dug him up from his son's property, only a hand was found.
After this, the British began to fight more up north. Then in 1783, war was over and Fort Moultrie was left with nature. It was overrun by storms, downpours, and small portion of the fort can be seen after this. The first American system of seacoast defense was established when a war between the French and English happened. This caused 20 more forts to be built along the Atlantic coast, making a new refurbished Fort Moultrie. Around 1860, Civil War struck, and the Confederate troops would fire on the Union from Fort Moultrie to the other side, Fort Sumter. And after that, then it was used in World War II as a defense of the harbor and a lookout. Finally, Fort Moultrie retired in 1947, serving 171 years in America. Now, it is an open historic place to visit on your next vacation.
Let's talk about the design of Fort Moultrie.
First, Fort Moultrie is located on the coast of Sullivan's Island, directly across from James Island. The fort's brother fort is Fort Sumter, an island fort across from it that is later built compared to when Fort Moultrie was built. As you can see, the design of Fort Moultrie is complicated, yet well thought out construction. It was designed on paper by Captain William T. Poussin, but later added on by a series of people. The inside is connected by a bunch of these tunnels, and the outside is below ground level. The construction of Moultrie started in 1776. The fort is now divided up by the times they were made to help distinguish the time they were used.
Here was where the first Fort Moultrie was. It was constructed with two 16-feet palmetto logs, leaves, and sand.
There is also a second Fort Moultrie.
Here is where lies the second Fort Moultrie. It was a 5-walled structure that got hit by a hurricane and fell.
Then, around 1800, the third Fort Moultrie is the most modern, with its concrete flooring and brick wall finishes. This was to hold ammunition, guns, and other weapons. There's also a World War II lookout that's great to take photos, by the way, and also underneath it, I didn't know this, but there's remains of the people who worked there, such as their desks and their outfits, and it's very cool. Now, once before I did say that they used palmetto logs instead of wood. You may be asking why. Well, the Patriots figured out that cannonballs, which was primarily used to fire on the fort, bounced off the palmetto logs. How did they just bounce off, you may ask? Well, palmetto logs are like a sponge and absorb the hit of most objects, like cannonballs. Sorry, those are my dogs. Anyways, because palmetto logs, leaves, and sand aren't super sturdy, they had to be refurbished a bunch of times.
Lastly, the fort was famous for the people who served here, such as Edgar Allan Poe, George Marshall, and William T. Sherman. But instead of talking about the obvious people, I'm going to talk about the famous warrior chief, Osceola. Osceola was the leader of his tribe, the Seminoles of Florida. You probably know this from Florida State's mascot. He and his tribe tried to be a resistance of being in a Native American reservation, but sadly were captured by Joseph Hernandez's tribe. Under flag of truce, he was lured by that and instead got imprisoned, which was a dirty move. Now, by that, he was captured here and was placed in Fort Moultrie. You would think that because of his imprisonment, he was behind bars, but instead of being behind bars, he was able to walk about and actually attended one of Charleston's plays. He was considered a spectacle to Charleston. Now, sadly, only a month later, he died, and they actually buried him here, and he's the only one who has actually been buried here at Fort Moultrie. Now, what we learned from the rangers here, only his body is buried here, not his head. Because he died from a disease, his head was studied by some doctors.
Okay, so this video is at the end, but I did want to introduce to you my favorite fun fact that I learned from the rangers here, and, well, I'll just let him say it.
My name is Peter Parker, formerly known as Spider-Man. It was June 28th of 1776 at the Battle of Sullivan's Island. I was the Commodore of the good ship Bristol in Her Majesty's Navy. While on quarterdeck, a cannon shot was fired from those no-good, ungrateful colonists and blew off my breeches. My backside was bare as a baby's bum.
Poor Peter Parker. Now, all of that was true about his pants flying off from a cannonball, except he's not Spider-Man.
In conclusion, I think Fort Moultrie is an underrated and overlooked place. Who knew it was used in World War II as a lookout? I hope this video informs you well, so then you at least know a little bit more about Fort Moultrie. I want to thank Ranger Kaylee and a volunteer to help me get some extra sources and extra information at the Visitor Center. You should come here. It's very fun, and their video is very great. It gave me extra information to build off of, and just come to Fort Moultrie. Let's talk about the design of Fort Moultrie.